Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House of Provincetown, where we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and where we support each other on our spiritual search for truth and meaning. My name is Reverend Kate Wilkinson, and I am so glad that you have joined us this morning. Welcome to those of you in the room, and welcome also to those of you joining us via our live stream. Before we begin our worship service, I have just a few announcements to share. First, I'd like to thank everyone who came to the Solidarity Vigil in Kingston on Tuesday. This was after the Black Lives Matter and Pride flags at the UU Church there were burned. It was a hard reason to be together, but it was a beautiful gathering. I was so proud of our congregation, especially as we presented new flags to them, which are now proudly hanging high up on their building. And there were hundreds of people in attendance from so many different churches, and it was a very touching evening. And there was a ritual that we did in Kingston on Tuesday that I'd like to try this morning, and that is to look around the room. We were on an open lawn, but today we'll do it in our room and make eye contact with someone that you did not come here with. So let's try that. Make eye contact with someone that you did not come here with, and just give a little wave. Just say hello across the room to someone that you did not come here with. And if folks in the back could do a favor for me and give a wave to the camera in the back. There's a red light on there. Give a wave to the camera in the back. Those folks watching from home, we did not come here with you, but we are here with you. These are our neighbors. That's what was said on Tuesday evening. These are your neighbors. And it's good to be reminded of that we're gathering with our neighbors. On Tuesday evening this week, we will resume our regular Zoom coffee hour at 5 o'clock. We gather each week to discuss the question of the week and to share a time of joys and sorrows. Everyone is invited, so please let us know if you need that Zoom link, which is also sent out each week to our email list. Tonight, great music on Sundays at 5. The concert is Broadway, Curtain Up, favorite songs from great musicals. We hope that you can come back for that. And finally, a reminder that we will not be having our regular in-person coffee hour today after service because you are all invited after today's worship service ends to head down to St. Mary of the Harbor in the East End for our interfaith cookout at 12:30. We'll be having hamburgers and hot dogs and veggie burgers on the grill, lots of potluck side dishes, watermelon and ice cream. There will be lawn games, beach access, and even a cotton candy machine. So please join us. There is extra parking at the Provincetown Theater, but please do try to carpool, because you know the East End summer in Provincetown is tricky. But we'll be joined by folks from our host, St. Mary's, also the Provincetown Methodist Church, St. Peter's, Chapel on the Pond, Christian Union, and also some of our Jewish friends. So it's going to be a great time. We'll see you down there after the service. I'm so excited. But let's take a moment now to affirm our Meeting House Covenant. You can find this printed on the purple laminated cards in your pews. I'm going to say it line by line, so you can just repeat it, each line back to me. Love is the spirit of this meeting house.
Love is the spirit of this meeting house.
This is our great covenant.
This is our great covenant.
To dwell together in peace.
To dwell together in peace.
To seek the truth in love.
To seek the truth in love.
and to help one another. And now, as we light our chalice here in the sanctuary, I invite those of you who are joining us online to light a candle wherever you are. In that way, we can feel connected even while we are apart. And this morning, I invite our worship host, Ellen, and Brenda's granddaughter, Grace, who is also one of our guest musicians this morning, to light our chalice for us.
This morning, our chalice lighting is by Anita Farber Robertson. We light this chalice to call us together, that it might call us to notice, call us to listen, to look, to see all who we are, and to remember all who we are not.
Won't you please join me now in singing our opening hymn, number 4, in these gray hymnals. That's number 4, I Brought My Spirit to the Sea. Please rise as you are able for number 4, I Brought My Spirit to the Sea. You may be seated. I invite you to join me now in a time of meditation and prayer. During this time or any time during the service, you are welcome to light a silent candle at the table to the right of the pulpit, where there is a journal to record your thoughts and prayers. After the prayer, we will sing together a beautiful hymn from our teal hymnal, number 1002, Comfort Me. We usually sing Spirit of Life, but this morning I really wanted to sing 1002, Comfort Me. So you might just have that one ready. We take a moment out of our busy lives to offer gratitude for all the many gifts and graces that bless us each day. All the ways we have enough and more than enough. And we think of those going without food, without safety, without love. We hold in prayer all those affected by war, and we lift up our fervent prayer for peace. And we struggle this morning with the way our politics have become violent and the fear of violence to come in a country so divided. May we condemn this violence, and may we find a way forward, remembering our common humanity. This morning we hold on our hearts the towns in Vermont which were devastated this week by more flooding. And this includes the town that Meeting House members Shelley and Lucinda live in. And we are thinking of them. We especially hold on our hearts this morning Kurt Reynolds and his husband, Michael Stone. Michael was airlifted to Boston this weekend after a medical emergency, and at the hospital, he was placed on hospice. Kurt is by his side and is surrounded by loving friends. And he asks that we light a candle for Michael this morning and lift up our communal prayers that he have a peaceful transition. And Ellen is going to light that candle for us now. And we also light one for Kurt, that he might feel the strength of our love now and in the days and weeks to come. Spirit of life, may all who need our love feel it right now as we send them our energy, compassion, and empathy. And may we also extend that to ourselves as best we are able. Amen. Please join me in singing hymn number 1002, Comfort Me. Please rise as you are able.
Comfort me,
The reading this morning is The Water That I Am by Lauren Spear. To cry is to experience release. I'm so grateful to shed emotion through my eyeballs and to let sadness or pain or joy spill over. In writing this, I'm realizing I don't know where tear water, comes from. Is there a little water tower located somewhere in my head that is waiting to be drained? Also, can sea mammals cry underwater? Maybe they do, but their tears mix with the ocean and they don't even know it's happening? I have some Googling to do. What I do know is that the human body is made up of 60% water, so it makes sense to me that the water that I am becomes visible when I need proof of what I'm feeling inside. I can feel it on my cheeks, wipe it on my sleeve, or lick it up and put it right back where it came from. Here's a song that I wrote with my friend Jonah Yano called The Water That I Am. I've been filling up on the water that I was and the water that I am, the water that I am. I put the river in my mouth and let it all drain out, just to understand the water that I was, the water that I am, the water that I was, the water that I am. Aren't we all wells of memories felt? Can you see water run deep? If you keep it safe, then I might let you trace the shape of the water in me. I've been washing up in the water that I was and the water that I am, the water that I am. Now I close my mouth and wait for my form to sublimate. I begin to understand the water that I was, the water that I was, and the water that I am, the water that I am.
Now is the time that we take a collection for the ongoing support of this meeting house and our shared ministry. As we enjoy a musical reflection by our choir, we welcome your donations here in the sanctuary or online through PayPal or Venmo. You can find that information on our website, uumh.org. At this time, I invite 4 volunteer ushers forward to take up our collection. On and off-site, your offerings will now be gratefully received.
In these hard times, in these hard times, there will always be singing. Always be singing in these hard times. In these hard times, there will always be singing. Always be singing in these hard times. And if you know the song, please join us. And if you don't, those are the words. This is a marvelous group of people. We owe them great gratitude.
always be singing in this hard time. In this hard time, there will always be singing. Always be singing in this hard times. In these hard times, there will always be singing. Always be singing in these hard times. There will always be singing. Always be singing in these hard times. In these hard times, there will always be singing. Always be singing in these hard times. In these hard times, there will always be singing. Always be singing in these hard times. In these hard times, there will always be singing. Always be singing in these hard times. In these hard times, there will always be dancing. Always be dancing.
Thank you. Last year, Jane Lee gifted me with an incredible book edited by her niece's husband, Brandon Stosoy. It's called Sad Happens, a Celebration of Tears. This book was a wonderful gift even before I opened it because of the cover. It sat on my desk like a piece of art, which is fitting because the book was an intentional collaboration with the illustrator, Brandon's friend Rose Lazar. It was also an incredible gift because no one has actually invited me to celebrate my tears before. Brandon dedicates the book to his mother, Nancy, who taught him that it was okay to cry. And Rose dedicates it to all the criers out there and says, "Thank you for your service." And so I loved this book from page 1. You see, I am a crier. I have been a crier for as long as I can remember. In this book, a collection of essays, Brandon invites people from all walks of life to reflect on some of their memories of crying. And so here are just a few of mine. When I was young, I cried constantly. My emotions lived very close to the surface, and I had no protections built up to shield me from sadness or to shield the world from my grief. I mourned for weeks when Ruby Gillis died of consumption in Anne of Green Gables. I cried tears of grief and shame when I lost a school library book. I was inconsolable when the neighbor cut down the towering pine trees between our houses. Among the tight-knit group of kids on our street, this earned me the unfortunate nickname, Katie Crier. My parents were very patient with me, but the older lady next door thought maybe they were taking too soft an approach and that some tough love was in order. And so she threatened to call the police if I didn't stop crying. This predictably led to more tears. Later, living in Boston in my 20s, I remember crying silently on the T after not being chosen at a job interview. A stranger smiled kindly at me and said, "It will be okay." And I remember crying in my mentor's office in seminary after returning from New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. I had seen so much devastation, had learned so much about racism, didn't understand how I could come back to my safe, unaffected everyday life when there were people suffering so. And I was moved beyond words when her response was to sit down and cry with me. I later learned to harness my sensitivity as my superpower, training it into a laser-focused empathy that I could use in my job as a minister. Feeling deeply also meant that I loved the world deeply, cared enormously, and could sense what other people were feeling, could sit and cry with them sometimes, as my mentor had done with me, so that they would not be alone. But I also had to work at building up a tough enough skin that I could take feedback, projection, even the harassment a public figure sometimes faces without it breaking me. A few years ago, my friend and close colleague's newborn baby died after just 5 days of life. The day after she died, I needed to inform my friend's congregation what had happened, and then lead our candlelight Christmas Eve service, celebrating the birth of a baby. And soon after, I was asked to preach at her funeral. To get through those 2 services, I stuffed my tears so deeply down inside that they didn't surface again for over a year, not even when my grandmother died. It was the longest I have ever gone without crying, and I thought that I had turned to stone. But really, it was just my heart temporarily protecting itself, knowing that I would not be able to function in the world if I allowed the full enormity of my grief to come all at once. And eventually, slowly, my tears came back, and I welcomed them like rain after a drought. Reading the book Sad Happens, I learned about a German phrase for people who cry easily, Naam Wasser gebaut, built too close to the water. Maybe that's why I feel at home here in Provincetown, surrounded by water on 3 sides. When you're the one crying, you can feel quite alone, Brandon writes. But truly, you aren't. And so he began to collect stories of people crying. At first in a series of tweets, and then in this beautiful book. This morning, I've chosen 4 of the essays from Sad Happens to share with you, and I've asked 4 people from the congregation to read them so that you can hear them from different voices. Although they are other people's stories, I invite you to find pieces of your own story in their words and in their tears.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. This piece is by author and journalist Zabar Bigay. I was 5 years old, the first time I ever saw an adult in my life cry. It was 1994, and it was also the first time I had ever seen a movie in a theater. The movie was The Lion King. And I remember the moment Mufasa died because as the music swelled and tears fell from my eyes, I looked up and saw what would become a core image, a core memory. Kofi, the fun adult with the booming laugh and off-color jokes. The one who always got drunk at parties, sobbing into the bucket of his popcorn. Outside, I asked Kofi about the tears and asked him if he was all right. I didn't know adults were allowed to cry. I didn't know that they ever did, at least in real life. He laughed off my question in the way that adults do when they sense that children can see right through them. In the garish fluorescent light of the shopping mall, Kofi suddenly looked like a different person, realer somehow. And I remember thinking, perhaps not as eloquently. This is what art can do. I remember feeling that somewhere in stories was a safe place to just be. I was raised to be a strong Black woman, which is to say, I was raised to repress, to chew down big feelings into something small, more manageable, easier to hide. This is how my mother was brought up, and her mother before that. And this made something of a problem of a child growing up, because all I did as a young child was cry and whimper and sob. And all the adults in my life did was scream and yell and regard me with a kind of pitying exasperation. It never felt safe to cry around my family. If I cried, there had to be some kind of justification for it, one that didn't seem self-indulgent, because to cry without a sufficient reason would invite all kinds of platitudes, reminders that to cry or be sad was tantamount to being frivolous and weak.
It's no use in crying over spilt milk. Big girls don't cry. Crying never solved anything. I think that's why I always love going to the movies, crying at the movies. Because a movie theater is a vessel, a space that holds big emotions, and more than that, exalts them, welcomes them. I love what a profound communal act it can be, to laugh and to scream and cry with other people in the dark. I love how safe it can feel in that space to let go. We don't need a justification for being moved, even if the stories and the people are not technically real. I never felt more powerful than when I cried at the first movie I saw in theaters after staying away all of 2020 due to the pandemic. It was ridiculous, if entertaining. Horror movie about getting old and dying. I can remember how strange it felt to sit in the dark with strangers again. How in the communal grief of everything happening in the real world permeate the air. How everyone seemed to laugh a little harder, gasp a little louder. And then, in the third act, a character who I hadn't expected to die did. And I found myself weeping. And I felt silly, because this was a silly movie, and I couldn't understand it. And then I heard someone sniffle. Another person sob. And I looked down the row I was seated in, and the row behind me, and the row behind that. And I saw several wet faces, and I knew instinctively that this wasn't even really about the movie, that this was something else we were all experiencing. I felt so much power in that moment, a power that seems amplified by the intimate communal act of letting go with people. Perhaps something small and fragile inside of us broke open, that all we had to do was to have the courage to let it. Okay.
Good morning. These are the words of Nathan Bergwijn, a writer and former bookseller. I clung to a woman more than twice my age in the bookstore where I worked, both of us crying. I considered her many things: customer, regular, friend, and delight. I proposed the day after the law changed, and now I was married. Before, if regulars asked me if I had a wife or was married, I said no. No lie. But now? I prevaricated when they asked. My better half read that. It's good. Instead of, my husband read that. He thought it was good. No real difference between the two, but out loud, the former diminished what the latter declared. It rankled me to adjust my words, but I'd learned to be wary. It wasn't just how straight people mentioned their husbands and wives so constantly, but how often they assumed a skinny white guy like me, agreed with their bigoted views. I felt a self-imposed pressure to stay quiet. The woman recovered from crying faster than I did. No surprise. She was a Polish woman in her late 80s who had survived a Germany that lives only in books for me. She was bright and kind to a world that was neither to her. She was my favorite customer at every bookstore where I'd ever worked. She followed me, store to store, as I got promoted. We exchanged Christmas cards, birthday wishes, and small tokens of friendship. And still, I hadn't told her. But a few moments before the crying, she'd noticed my wedding ring and said, "Oh, you got married." "Yes," I said, and the free fall in my stomach began. Understand, as much as possible with someone you see only monthly, I loved this woman. She was one of the reasons I was a bookseller. It certainly wasn't the pay or the hours. It was customers like her. "What's your wife's name?" she asked. And that was it. I respected this woman. I loved my husband. And I wasn't going to lie. "Husband," I said. "His name is Dan." It came out calm, a bit reserved, and maybe close to a whisper. I braced for her reaction. She burst into tears. I hugged her on reflex, startled. And into my ear, this wonderful woman whispered, "I'm so happy for you. I never was that brave." So I held a woman more than twice my age in the middle of a bookstore crying. Two people who'd known each other for over a decade, whispering words we should have been allowed to shout.
These are the words of Renee Kladzik, a journalist. "I've only cried once with a source. Working as a reporter on the US-Mexico border during the pandemic, there have been so many tears. I've witnessed the tears of ICU nurses, migrants marched across the border back into Mexico, unceremoniously expelled from the US, parents of transgendered children trying to make sense of the latest hateful legislation. I've hidden my tears during interviews. That time my editor made me interview a bishop after the Texas abortion ban had passed, and I fought the urge to scream "liar" at him when he told me he'd take care of the children and the unwanted babies. Instead, tears ran down my cheeks while I said over the phone, "Oh, thank you so much for your time." I've saved tears for later, on a ride-along with the Border Patrol, when the agents kept referring to human beings as bodies, and caught a 17-year-old Guatemalan girl who had been sexually trafficked. She didn't cry as they apprehended her, or when they made her take off her belt and shoes, surrender her phone, and sit in the dirt by their van while they talked on their walkies about more bodies on the side of the mountain. Instead, I cried when I drove along the border highway back home. But I only cried openly once during a Zoom meeting with a young woman who lost her uncle to COVID-19. He was a trumpet player. Oh, his lungs were so strong. Just 60 when he died, he seemed like a real character. He reminded me of my uncle, who had also recently died. She started to cry when she talked about him. His sense of humor, his favorite emojis, his idiosyncratic personal style. And I found myself crying with her. Sometimes you need permission to cry for someone else's pain. And I did that day. I think crying for and with someone else is an expression of love. It is the most visual indicator of empathy and a sign of connection or surrender. But at other times, it can feel like a transgression if you don't have enough in common with the person, or you don't feel that you are peers. As a reporter, I'm often talking to someone who is fundamentally a stranger. For some interviewees, my tears could feel almost like an insult. I want to be the person who is okay with how big of a crier I am, to not feel bad if I cry in front of someone who might judge me for it. I want to be a spokesperson saying, hey, this is a healthy release, there's nothing wrong with crying. But I feel overcome with shame when I cry at the wrong moment, or if tears come bursting out as I'm trying to navigate conflict and I can no longer speak. I rushed to get off the phone with that bishop because I could hear the tears in my voice, and I didn't want him to. He hadn't earned that doorway into my humanity. I want to say that it's always okay to cry if you feel like it, but I know this world.
These are the words of Maddie Diaz, musician and songwriter. My plan was to make it through airport security. My plan was to make it through airport security and down the long terminal hallways, onto and off of the moving walkways, and to my gate. If I could make it to my gate, then maybe I could make it onto the plane and all the way down the aisle to my mid-row seat, and maybe if I made it to my seat, I would make it into the air, back onto the ground and off the plane, and somehow make it into a cab and up the stairs and onto the other side of my own front door. Yeah, my plan was to hold it down and make it all the way back to my home, where everything smelled and looked and felt and was familiar. But it came in spite of me. I had no part in it. I was just some human vessel of sad, stumbling through the metal detector, robot portal thingy, trying to put my shoes back on at the other end of the luggage belt. I let all of what I had planned to contain pour out of me and left a trail of it from security to Terminal C. For crying. C for crying. Just kidding. I can hardly remember that city I was even in. That's a lie. I remember exactly what city I was in and exactly what happened, where, with who, when, and never why, but that's not the important part. I sat down against a wall in a dull pile and let the crying take over, and didn't feel anything else for a minute. I felt people walking past and somehow didn't leave my body to be one of them, to look at myself, which was probably the only reason I didn't stop crying. I don't remember time passing. I don't remember moving, breathing, thinking fast or slow. I felt humming. Meditative. When I came back up, there was a note sitting on top of my suitcase. I can half remember someone putting it there. I can half remember looking into someone's eyes only briefly, but directly. I read the note, I stood up, and I got on the plane. An older man next to me shared a baseball game streaming on his laptop. He told me he had a kid my age. I got home, put my bags down, and I hung the note on my refrigerator. I kept it for years and years. I've moved so many times since that it was lost somewhere in the shuffle, but I remember that it said at the bottom, I hope you can remember that you are human. There is love. So, I guess this is kind of my note to you. When you come back up, there is love.
We're living in a time of despair for many people, Brandon writes in his introduction to Sad Happens. The pandemic, which brought an extraordinary loss of life, problematic Supreme Court rulings, war, the threat of climate catastrophe. And next to this, we're all battling the usual stress of work, everyday life, relationships, parenthood. For many people, it's been harder to maintain balance or to want to keep going. And that's why he decided to make a donation with the proceeds of the book Sad Happens to the Trevor Project, which provides suicide prevention and mental health crisis services to LGBTQ+ young people. He wanted the book to help people. But despite the title and some of the subject matter, Brandon says, this isn't a sad book. And I agree. It's a celebration of tears. And I hope that's what you've experienced this morning. As one of the essayists, Jillian Medford, put it, whenever I do one of those really big, weepy, healing, snot dripping into my mouth and down the side of my chin kind of cries, I feel like I've just watered all the plants in my mind, put them out in the sun, and watched them grow and bloom a little bit more. It's a never-ending process of having to water yourself. Empty the bucket and let it fill up again. Whether you are a crier or not, I hope that you have had a chance to empty your bucket this morning. And I hope that you have had a chance to fill it up again. I hope that you can remember that we are human. And I hope that you know that when you come back up, there is love. Amen. And blessed be.
It has become our practice to pose a question based on the theme of the service each week. It can be a topic of sharing at coffee hour today or with friends during the week. If you'd like to delve deeper into this topic, we invite you to our midweek Zoom coffee hour on Tuesday at 5. Please let Kenneth know in the office if you need the link for that. Our question this week is, tell us about a time you remember crying. Tell us about a time you remember crying.
And we'll close with these words. I don't know where tear water comes from, but I am grateful to have this place where tears are welcome, this community where we can comfort each other, and this weekly reminder that there is more love in this world than we know. May we go out into the world and share that message with all of those we encounter today. Go in peace.